The following art history and appreciation assignment is based on the teaching of an art history scheme to a group of 5th year students at St Joseph's Secondary School, Doon, County Limerick. Rationale for the scheme. Given previous contact with the student group and development of previous art history schemes, I was aware of their coverage of the European section of the art history curriculum. Following a roughly chronological order, I chose the artist Sandro Botticelli as a particular area of focus. Given the strongly religious nature of much of Italian Renaissance artwork, I felt that Sandro Botticelli's focus on secular subject matter was an important element within the scheme, and as a variation of theme and artist studied. Planning for the scheme. I planned the scheme over 4 single class periods. Given the period of time allocated for the scheme, I structured the development of the study as follows. First and foremost, given previous experience with the group, I was eager to avoid the provision of too much information for the students as we worked. I wanted to draw upon the students' own particular knowledge and ideas, and therefore, in order to introduce the artwork, I first provided the students with strong colour visuals through the use of a colour projector. The work Primavera, for example, given the nature of the work, the title is not self-explanatory. I found this a useful device in introducing the work of Botticelli. First and foremost, it is a strong example of his dealing with non-religious subject matter. From the students' own perspective, they were able to compare and contrast the work of Botticelli with previous artists they had covered. Drawing upon prior knowledge, I decided to step back from the students' discussion. Once the students had established possible themes and ideas related to the artwork, I then geared questions towards students who were less forthcoming in their ideas and opinions. As a whole, I felt that this approach was certainly a useful one. Without giving the students a large amount of background information or information based on theme, the students themselves were able to deduct various meanings, such as the idea that the painting related to mythological subjects. Based on Botticelli's focus on subtext and theme within his work, I drew on several important aspects of the work in my approach to teaching. Symbolism and subtext, first of all, were important talking points within our discussion of the work. Based on that initial discussion, in which I then continued to introduce background information and information based on the mythology to which the work of Botticelli referred to. The idea of humanism and the place of man in the universe, for example, was an important point of reference for the work, and also the use of symbolism. Botticelli continuously uses the flower motif within his work. I found that this device and the theme which occurred as a result of his use of it drew other points of reference into the scheme itself. One particular point of reference which I found to be a useful device in teaching of this scheme was the issue of cross-curricular learning. I found that the scheme provided an opportunity for drawing upon external influences and prior knowledge which the students themselves had come into contact with. Given my awareness of the student group, I was aware that they had previously studied the Shakespearean text of Hamlet and recently been to a stage production of the play. In drawing upon the reference of Shakespeare to the motif of the flower and the symbolism which has been linked to it throughout the centuries, I drew this particular knowledge into the scheme, and drawing upon this information I referred back to the painting of The Birth of Venus. In identifying links between the students' own knowledge of literature and the artwork itself, I was able to provide a new perspective. Through the simple showing of the Shakespearean scene to the students and then referring back to the artwork, the the idea of the flower motif was brought into discussion, and the students were able to identify certain meanings associated with the rose motif in the Birth of Venus, for example. This simple exercise was a strong reinforcement for the students' learning because it provided a new means of focusing on the artwork and a new perspective. In moving throughout the teaching of the scheme in particular order, I focused first and foremost on initial discussion in the class, through which the students drew upon their own ideas and previous knowledge. Then moving on to other external resources, I drew from textbooks, from the students' own course books, and from other sources of information. In consolidating these various sources into handouts and visuals for the students, I found that I was able to delve into various sources of information. The prescribed textbooks for the students were not particularly informative, I felt, and so I think it was important to think outside the box in terms of drawing upon sources of information for the students. Additional sources were the use of past exam papers, for example. This was an important point of reference, in particular in formulating our discussions and in developing a sample answer as a group. Through looking at a series of exam questions from past papers and also referencing the marking scheme, I felt that for the students it put the correct approach for dealing with answering exam questions into perspective. This is an important aspect of looking at the scheme as a whole, I think, for the students, and also it provides a focus on the importance of the use of diagrams and annotated information as the students worked through, which we then as a group continued to develop. I also used various multimedia resources. The use of projected images within the classroom as a whole gave us an opportunity to look at the artworks. The use of printed images also were strong. They were a strong point of reference in that it allowed the students to see the artworks in full colour. One particularly important resource that I relied upon in teaching this scheme was the website Google Art Project. An interesting exercise for us as a group was to literally take the virtual tour of the Uffizi Gallery in Florence, where the Birth of Venus itself is situated. For the students, I think that it was an enlightening experience to be able to see inside the walls of the gallery itself. Felt like such a privilege. Also, looking at the artwork in high definition, as we were able to do, through focusing in on the artwork. Here you'll see the Birth of Venus on the left, gave us a real insight into the actual appearance of the work, the style of Botticelli's painting, and this provoked a new kind of range of discussion as the students literally had control of the computer screen and could delve into a whole new layer of the painting itself by being able to almost come in contact with. In terms of assessment of the scheme, the students went from initial discussion of the work to group discussion and development of a sample question, through looking at sample questions from past exam papers, and subsequently developing independent essays and the development of drawings based on the artworks of Botticelli. I asked the students to focus on comparing and contrasting Botticelli's use of composition within the Birth of Venus and Primavera, as the artworks themselves were treated as a pair by the artist himself. I felt that it was important to create links between the two. Here are some examples of the students' diagrams which they developed as part of their written work. The discussion and written response became interlinked in that, as a class, we focused on particular points of reference and looking at the human figure, for example. That's a very important element within the scheme, and Botticelli's study of it. So, from going from initial development of informal discussion to the closing development of student response and assessment of the scheme through the development of written answers and the development of diagrams, etc. I was pleased with how the scheme developed, and I felt that the way in which the work had been approached and the way in which the students discussed the work um, developed their own knowledge and developed their own independence in later creation of independent response.